I'm Judy Carson, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, which is wonderful, and lots of new faces too. Thank you all for being here. I know for quite a few people, this is the Friday before spring break, so we really appreciate you spending your Friday with us. And we're excited, as always, to bring you another fabulous Friday Cafe. I'm here with my colleague, Betsy Laborious, who's my co-host and partner in Friday Cafe for over 7 years. So today we're going to really focus on the linking to learning aspect of family engagement. And we have wonderful, wonderful co-hosts, co-presenters. So with that, I want to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Betsy Laborious, to introduce our conversation catalyst.
Good morning, everyone. It's so happy to have you all here. My name is Betsy Laborious, and I am the project director for the Connecticut Family School Partnerships, which is the partnership with the State Department of Education and other partners. What I would like now is to introduce Jill Nyhus, and she's the Chief Growth Officer for PowerMyLearning, and Emily Amick, Managing Director of Programs, again, for PowerMyLearning. I have been working with PowerMyLearning for probably 1.5 years, and we are really looking at ways, the wonderful ways that they have in terms of providing information and that whole piece that Judy talked about as far as the link to learning. What we know is parents are incredibly curious right now about what's happening in the classroom. They want to know. And so that whole piece about linking what's happening in a classroom and how parents can reinforce learning is incredibly important, and probably one of the major aspects of success for students in schools. Excuse me. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Jill and Emily and let them begin. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to be with you today. Emily is going to share a screen. Here we go. As Betsy said, my name is Jill Nyhus. I'm Chief Growth Officer here at PowerMyLearning. My colleague Emily is joining as well. We are both former educators. I spent several years in the Office of Family and Public Engagement for DC Public Schools. So I've been in many of your shoes doing this work of really trying to connect and build allyship with families. And today you're going to walk away with some amazing, rich information and resources from my colleague Emily. She's a fantastic facilitator, and you're going to really enjoy your time today with some really fun activities and just getting to know each other and walking away with things that you can do pretty much right away, because at the end of the day, we want to make this very practical. So just as a context on who we are, so as Betsy mentioned, PowerMyLearning, we are a national nonprofit. We have been around since 1999, and we are really dedicated to advancing educational equity across the country, really focusing on teachers, building the collaboration between teachers, students, and families. Emily, if you could advance the slide to the introduction slide. I'm sorry. Little frog in my throat this Friday morning. We are currently in 4 of the top 5 school districts in the country, working alongside and among a number of other districts in the country, working alongside teachers and families in the areas of SEL and culturally responsive education and learning acceleration. And we do professional development and coaching and all kinds of things that really support that collaboration between teachers, students, and families. So I want to set some context for you today for our conversation, which I think will help to frame our mindset today. And already in Judy's opening, Emily and I on the background were they're saying our guiding values. So we are in alignment with with what was shared. And, you know, we really do come from an asset-based approach when we're working with both teachers and with families. So just as a context, so we've got teachers, students, and families. And just to say, the last 25 months now, it's been 25 months since our education system has been upended, unlike we've ever seen. And obviously, our teachers and students and families have been affected in innumerable ways, as everyone on this call has. So let's just start with students. You can go to the next slide. So all of our students, no matter their socioeconomic or race, have been affected in terms of learning. We do know that, so McKinsey, the big consulting firm, found that at the end of 2021 school year, students were on average 4 to 5 months behind where they have typically been in the past. Unsurprisingly, students from low-income communities, as well as students of color, were disproportionately harmed by these setbacks, especially in math and reading. Let's talk about families. So it's really interesting about families, just as Betsy mentioned. Families have had a new front row seat to what has been going on in a new way. So they have a whole new perspective on what's happening in their child's school and in their classroom. And they really want to understand where their children are. As you can see on the screen right now, there's a couple results from some surveys that were done. And you can see that, you know, they really want to connect with what's happening in the classroom and really figure out, how can I help my child in their learning? So let's now switch over to the teachers. So teachers, we know, are really on the front row of what we call interrupted learning, because we know some places did go back to school, some didn't, but then even when kids went back to school classrooms are closing. And so there's just a lot of interrupting that's been happening over the last couple of years and is still going on. And so these teachers have been carrying the burden of this this challenge of accelerating learning. So there's a lot to unpack here. So the question is, how do we move forward? So here at PowerMyLearning, you can go to the next slide, Emily. We like to talk about how the current dynamic of learning relationships that is happening in our educational systems is that we've got students in the middle, right? And they are carrying the burden of carrying the communication and messaging to school and to home. But you have teachers on one side and families on the other, and very rarely are they connected. Really what's happening in this line that we're seeing is that it's inhibiting teachers and families from engaging each other as allies. So at PowerMyLearning, and I'm sure that everyone on this call, what we are all about is bending that line down and turning it into a triangle. And this is what effective family engagement looks like. So in this triangle approach, teachers now have a fuller picture of their students, and they're more able to motivate them. They understand their communities, where the communities where their families and students live. The other thing is, when you look at families are now connected with what's happening in the classroom because they've been invited into the learning process. And then students, they're no longer in the middle. They are supported by teachers and families as allies. And we love to use that word allyship because it's more than just engagement, right? Engagement is coming actually from a place of power. So one person has the power to engage someone else. And when we talk about allyship, it's that that equality, the voices are equal. There's value and worth of everyone in this triangle. All right, so we know that this triangle approach to family engagement works. You all are on the call doing this work every day, working towards these results that we know from research so well. And this is what I think motivates us and keeps us going, because we know at the end of the day, when families and teachers are allies, great things happen for kids. So the question for today, as we walk through our time together, is what if we built the capacity of teachers and families to collaborate with one another, like really collaborate, really build that allyship to support student success? So we're going to walk through some great ideas for you to unpack this question. And I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Emily, who's going to lead us for the rest of our time together.
All right, thank you so much, Jill, for setting that context for us and giving us, the space to enter into some of this discussion. So as Jill said, our goal is really to think about what's it take, right? What does it take for us as people on the educational institution end of things to support families so that we can be active and authentic allies with them in support of students? And Jill really thoughtfully laid out our vision, PowerMyLearning's vision and philosophy, which is summed up in our triangle of learning relationships. And when I look at Connecticut's definition of family engagement, which Judy introduced earlier, it's really clear to me that our values are very deeply aligned, right? Our organization and the work that you guys are doing, we all have this belief that families have the will and the capacity to support their children, and that it's our responsibility to bring them in as equal partners. Judy also shared the guiding principles, and I would love for you guys to just take another glance at them, keep them in your mind, because I'm going to ask you later to reflect on where you see these principles reflected in the resources that we're providing, in the work that we do at PowerMyLearning, and I'll come back at the end and we can have some conversation about that as well. So today, my objectives for our time together are for us to, I'm going to introduce PowerMyLearning's framework for teachers. The framework provides a roadmap really for infusing families into everything that is done at schools. In addition to the framework, I'm also going to be sharing tips, strategies, resources that you all can use immediately. You can share with other people in your schools and districts, really to support the work that you're doing right now, right away. And there's time built in for us to do some reflection and sharing as you're thinking about your next steps towards really authentically partnering and allying with families. You can really share it in the chat that families really want to be involved and they want to learn about their child's learning and they're feeling closed out, right? And I think that feels very resonant and true from experiences that we're having with families in our work and what we're hearing from the teachers that we work with as well. And they're feeling really frustrated by it. Yeah. So during school closures, families got some inside view. They really got insight into what was happening in the instruction that their children were receiving. They could sit in the background, watch the Zoom calls, and it's changed kind of their expectations around involvement, I think. The chat's kind of moving, and I'm really hearing some things too about trust being at the center of the work that we do. We are going to talk about that a little bit more, dive into that as we go. And also the supports that families need, right? They need support with navigating all of the technology so that they can engage remotely as well as in person. So just as our perspectives on engaging families have changed, the families' perspectives have changed too, right? Now that they've got some deeper insight into kind of what students are learning and how the instruction is going. And a few months into the pandemic, families reported that they had a deeper understanding and appreciation for what teachers are doing, right? And they also shared that they want to be more involved. So the survey results shown here reflect that initial survey early in the pandemic, and then another one towards the end of last school year that really showed that that remains strong, that desire to stay engaged. And a lot of you are reflecting that with your chat comments, right? So all of this means that we have a real opportunity, and I would argue a responsibility, right, to leverage the power of teamwork with families, really to support students better than we ever have before. And this is an opportunity that, you know, it's something that we have to take advantage of. So Jill shared this slide before and pointed out like how powerful, you know, our work with families can be when it comes to improving student outcomes. But I want to bring this slide back so that we can start to talk about how, right? How do we do this work? I think a lot of the times teachers and family liaisons, parent coordinators, principals, all of us, we want to jump right into the resources and the strategies. We want to jump into doing, right? But what we've learned in our work with educators is that jumping straight into the doing is sometimes not effective, right? And that the most powerful way to shift our practices around family engagement is by examining our mindsets and beliefs that are driving our actions. And so that's why when we work with teachers and other educators and people in education, we really begin by sharing these 4 beliefs for family engagement. These beliefs originally come from a book called Beyond the Bake Sale, which was authored by Dr. Karen Mapp and her co-author, Ann Henderson, who I believe I saw is here at the at our webinar today. So that's super exciting. And if that is truly you and not just someone who shares your name, please let us know. And welcome. Thank you. So Anne and Karen are, you know, leading scholars in the field of family engagement, and we've had the honor of partnering with Dr. Mapp as an advisor at PowerMyLearning, the real Ann Anderson. Wonderful. And so, you know, I've personally been able to learn a lot from that work, that collaboration with Dr. Mapp. And we use this book and other of their texts to really drive our work with educators when it comes to partnering authentically with families. So we've, you know, really believe that holding on to these 4 beliefs, these core beliefs that you see here, is essential. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge that they're not always easy to hold on to. I can share personally, just be a little vulnerable here, that in my own teaching experience, I always felt very, very aware of core belief number 4, right? I understood that there was a power dynamic, that it was my responsibility to reach out to families and make them feel welcome and valued, and that a lot of the families of my students may have felt intimidated by the school, or they felt blamed when their kids were acting out. And I also recognized that I was a white woman with class privilege, you know, and I was working with many students of color, including many newcomers to the United States. And some of them and their families had very limited experience with formal education. So number 4 resonated strongly. I was always aware of that one. But I sometimes struggled with number 2. You know, when I thought about all the challenges that families were facing, you know, it was easy for me to slip into adopting a little bit of a deficit lens. And I worried that families didn't have the time, you know, to support their child's their learning. I saw their lack of formal educational success as a barrier because I was looking through the lens of my own experiences. I didn't always consider the many assets that our families brought to the table when it came to supporting what I was doing with their children in the classroom. So I share this to say that wherever we are with these core beliefs is where we are, right? And our goal is to do the work that we need to do in order to really feel each of these core beliefs in our bones, but also to note that there's no blame or shame if we're finding some of these a little difficult to hold on to at different times. As I mentioned, you know, we really feel that it's our work to work first on beliefs and the mindsets that undergird all of our actions, you know, that drive our actions as practitioners. And then once we've explored those mindsets as a foundation, then we can dive into some of the practices that can help us truly, truly partner with families. So I wanted to share with you the PowerMyLearning framework for teachers, which is what drives a lot of our work that we do with teachers. So this is just the visual overview. we have organized all of our work with teachers around the 4 domains of teacher practice that you see here. So those are the domains over on the left. And what we're talking about is creating a safe and nurturing learning environment, planning and delivering rigorous and relevant instruction, using data to drive our decision making, and helping students develop a sense of agency and ownership over their learning. But then what you'll see in the 2 columns to the right are research-based best practices across each domain, both with students and with families, right? So each indicator includes best practices, strategies, exemplars, right? And it draws upon research in this field. And in the fields of social emotional learning, culturally responsive education, and just instructional best practices in general. So I'm going to focus today over on the rightmost column. We're going to dive a little deeper into the with families column of this particular matrix.
Oh, I have it in the bathroom.
And the first thing that we're going to do actually is identify where each of us feel like we situate. What are our strengths in terms of these domains, and which are the ones that we're most interested in as areas of growth? And then if I see some overwhelming trends, we'll also try to use that to allocate how we distribute the time for the remainder of the session. So what you can do is, if you have a cell phone with you, you can scan the QR code that you're seeing on your screen, or you can go to the tiny URL that was, which is already in the chat, thank you, Jill, that will take you to a tool called Mentimeter. And I'm gonna try to get, I gotta move that over before I present. How do we see? I'm going to try to share this, drag this over onto the screen that I am sharing. Here we go. And push. There we go. Okay. And so we can see areas of strength popping up based on your results that you're entering. So again, the domains are creating a safe and nurturing learning environment, planning and delivering rigorous and relevant instruction, using data to drive decision-making, and helping students develop agency. So what we're seeing here is that we feel like our school or district is partnering effectively with families in the areas of data-driven decision-making, followed by learning environment. Let's see where we're landing on areas of growth. Instructional planning and delivery. Yeah. That is one that I think traditionally, often we don't think about including families in as much as we could, but the research behind the role that families play in their child's learning is so compelling. I know many of you are familiar with the work of Dr. Joyce Epstein out of Johns Hopkins and her team, you know, and then Dr. Mapp and Dr. Henderson will tell you as well that, you know, family engagement that is linked to learning is so, so critical. So we'll definitely look at some ways to engage families in that domain as well as the others. So thank you for indulging me with that Mentimeter pool. Okay. All right, so I'm going to put a link in the chat to a resource page. Everything that I share with you today for the remainder of this session is available on this page, and you can bookmark it and keep it for as long as you need. Did everybody get a chance to engage with the Mentimeter poll? Do you feel ready to move on? You can give me thumbs ups, or you can send me chat messages if you want me to slow down ever. Okay, so this resource page contains links to everything that we're sharing today, including the full framework for teachers. It's a pretty robust document. So the overview page that I shared with you is just a visual to kind of give you a hint of what's inside. And then all of the other resources that we'll be exploring together today are also on this page. So we'll start with the learning environment. This domain is all about creating a safe and supportive community, right, where students feel a true sense of belonging and where teachers are building relationships with families. And when teachers are doing that, when we have these relationships with families, and not just teachers, but all the adults in a school, you know, that's when students see congruence and connectivity between school and home, right? That's when they're less likely to feel alienated from the school environment. And so when I work with teachers, when my team works with teachers, we generally start wherever they're most interested, but we guide them towards starting here. Because if this isn't in place, if there is not a safe and nurturing learning environment, it's really hard to work on anything else. You know, this is kind of the foundation. So in this domain, we identified that there are two really key practices that need to be in place. And the first is around communication, meaningful two-way communication that's linked to learning. And the second is around just building trust and building relationships with families, which we saw in the chat earlier. Someone identified as just the most critical part to this work. So we know that establishing this communication is a key area of growth for a lot of schools and districts. And while there's no magic trick for this, you know, we do have a few tips. We're often very good at sharing information out, right? At communicating in one direction, but the two-way aspect can sometimes be more challenging. And so we really encourage every communication with families to invite them to have a call to action, something for them to respond to, and especially not just a do this please, but a share this please, right? Give us your feedback, tell us what this means to you, what matters about this, and how it impacts your child. Ensuring that the communication is really personalized, right? Like use people's names, reference the prior conversations. It's the things we do in our relationships outside of school and work, right? We remember what we talked to people about. We remember their children's names, their pets' names, right? And bringing that into the communication is so critical. And then also spending time in the community, right? So even if you don't live in the community where you work, you know, take your dog for a walk, shop at the grocery store there, run into the families and the students. It's such a powerful way to kind of have that personal connection with people.
I guess what's exciting to me about this is as part of one of our grants, we have to do 3 surveys and 3 focus groups. And so we keep saying, you know, there's got to be this stuff out there, right? We can't be recreating the wheel all the time, but also we're using something called Parent Square. And we know that 177 of our parents are accessing that in their home language. And so we would be able to send out a poll like this through Parent Square and people can access it in their home language and it would be easy. So thank you. You just check something off my to-do list.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Parent Square is a great tool for sharing information, and it does allow for parents to communicate back as well, which is really important. As you're learning about families and their interests and their strengths and, you know, their own, you know, cultural and linguistic capital, as you're entering into units of studies, you can reach back out to families and say, hey, I know that this is something that you guys are interested in. Would you like to play a role? Would you like to come and share some information with the class? Or is there something that your child can bring in? You know, just finding ways to make connections back to child's cultural contexts as their familial context as they're entering into different learning is so powerful, right? And it really, there's, you know, just to get a little brain science-y, right? We always talk about as educators how important it is to connect to prior knowledge, but prior knowledge isn't just what they learned last year in math class. Right? Their prior knowledge is everything that they've been learning from birth on. And so making those connections to their own familial context, their cultural context is just so powerful because it's really causing those, you know, neural networks to build, right? Those synapses are firing and they're going to understand things more deeply and retain things longer when they're able to connect new learning to their own lived experience and previous knowledge. Which is actually like a great segue into instructional planning and delivering. and delivery. So we, as I mentioned before, when we were filling out the Mentimeter poll, like we don't always think about the role that families can play in instruction, but they can be such valuable partners in this area of practice. So the first indicator in this domain is about sharing learning experiences with or expectations rather, with families, right? And we do spend a lot of our time as educators unpacking standards and articulating learning goals, right, for students, for ourselves, and often for our students, but when families are on the same page as us and understanding these, then they're much better equipped to really help students drive towards those goals. So if we're able to communicate what they are to them in language that is accessible, that's super powerful. The second indicator is about what we were just kind of talking about briefly, which is like the relevance of our instruction and our instructional materials to students. So there's lots of, thought and research around culturally responsive education about how can we, are we doing the classroom audit? Are we ensuring that our materials are providing, windows into other cultures and mirrors reflecting our students' own cultures that we're sharing with them? Are we connecting the content that we're teaching, whether it's math, science, history, ELA, to the world around us now and the context in which we're all living now, as well as children's own traditions, values, so that we can really build those bridges between our instructional goals, right, and what's important to our students and what they know from their lives outside of the classroom. So tips to do this, because we do know that the most impactful type of family engagement is tied to student learning, are to create some family-friendly versions of standards, right? We're educators. We are steeped in this academic language. And I myself was a math teacher, and the math standards are often very, very mathy. So trying to find ways to provide examples to families, right? Break them down into family-friendly language, it can be really helpful here. Sending home activities that families and children can do together. This is a great way for them to have fun learning together at home, and our recommendation is always like, take that learning offline if you can. Make it stuff that people can do around the house. It involves movement, it involves discussion, it involves art, so that it's something that students, children, and their family partners can really enjoy together. And then in your lessons, ensuring that you're connecting to students' interests and cultures. So the resource that we're sharing here, and it's one of really many that we could have shared, I guess, but this one is a survey that, or not a survey, sorry, like an assessment, a self-assessment, in determining how well your school is bridging the racial, cultural, and social differences and class differences that exist. I was talking to a principal recently, and I loved the way that she described the situation at her school. She said, "We are in a community that has changed a lot, but our teaching staff has not." Right? So over 10, 15, 20 years, the community has changed, but the makeup of the staff at the school had not. And so there are a lot of divides to bridge. So this resource also comes from the Beyond the Bake Sale book. And it asks a series of questions just to help you reflect on how well you're bridging these differences at a big picture level. So it goes through, not just, are we, what's the makeup of our PTO or PTA? Who's making decisions around textbook adoption, right? What does our school look like to people who are coming into it? So this again is on that resource page. And if you want to just take a moment to check it out, and then let us know, are there questions or categories that you would add? Are there things that really stand out to you? And how might you use this checklist? Oh, I'm seeing Patty's comment in the chat that sometimes we explain the standard, but not the how they can support children with that learning. Absolutely. That's where I think the home learning activities can be really powerful. If there's a game they can play together, something where the adult does not have to be the subject matter expert, but instead can, engage in the activity with the child. And we'll see some examples of those in a minute too. Good question, Kimberly, about who uses this survey. This is a survey that could be completed, together maybe with the instructional leadership team. Any person or group of people in the school could really look at this together. I think it would be really powerful to have families also, looking at this and responding to whether they feel these things are present in their school. And feel free to jump in because I know you've developed this resource.
Well, of course, if your school has an action team that's working on family and community engagement, that would be an excellent one, but it can also be used in a faculty meeting or to create a committee or task force to look at how well the school is doing. It's a starting point. It's just asking people to reflect in these different areas and to be honest about where they think their school is, so that they can then sort of circle areas of priority and figure out what they need to work on next.
It's a fantastic tool for kind of just doing an audit. Where are we now? And what are the areas that we want to invest our energy and resources in? I'll move on to the next domain. Our third domain is on data-driven decision-making. And when it comes to families, we're usually pretty good at sending out data to families. We're sending out test results, we're sending out I say report card, but I don't mean individual student report cards. Sometimes, the overall school and district report cards of, how are we performing, all of that. But where we sometimes fall short is really in gathering, and not just gathering, but also valuing and using the information that families have to share with us. So our tendency as educators and researchers is often to think of data as limited to test scores and other numbers, right? And so we don't always know how to prioritize or use the anecdotal and qualitative data that families are bringing to the table. But this is what can really help us understand students, understand their strengths, their needs, and how best to help them learn and grow. And then, we also know, even though we send out a lot of data, sometimes just sending it out isn't sufficient. Families don't always know how to interpret that data. They don't know what it means. And frankly, sometimes the data we send doesn't have a lot of meaning. Grades don't always reflect what students know and are able to do. So we have, information goes out, but it doesn't help families know how to help their children. So a few tips that we offer are, if you're using home learning activities, invite families to give feedback. And so again, I'll point to Joyce Epstein's team, and at Johns Hopkins, they developed a model called TIPS, which is Teachers Involve Parents in Schoolwork. And a key component of that was to allow families to give feedback back to the school. So I'll show you the resource we're going to share as a little homework survey or home learning activity survey that's modeled on the TIPS model. Another thing that we can do is share information on upcoming areas of study and invite families to share what they know, what their context is with that. I'll give a great example from my own experience. When my children were little, their school every semester would have a continent that was their area of focus, and they do a lot of different activities around that continent. And so they would always let families know, so if you have family there, if you have traveled there, if you have art that reflects the continent, if you enjoy the food of the continent, if, any knowledge that you have or context that you have about this continent, whether it was Asia or Europe or Africa, et cetera, they would invite us to be a part of that learning and to make connections between what the children were learning in school and at home. And so just sharing that information with families can open up all sorts of access to information about your children, your students, and their families that you did not have before. And then also to invite families to reflect on their children's work, to really see what they're learning and what they're doing. So whether that's portfolios that you're sending home, whether you're doing that through student-led conferences, just really giving families insight into the actual work that their children are completing at school can be much more powerful than seeing an A or a B on a report card. Here's another resource. Teachers that I've worked with really love this. It's quick, it's easy, and I'm very excited to share it. So it's a family feedback form that you can send home with homework or a home learning activity. It can be for the whole class, or it can be something that you're just sending home for particular students that you're trying to support with a particular skill. It includes 3 very quick statements, and these are taken from the TIPS model. So they can agree or disagree with the statements. My child seemed to understand this activity. My child seemed to enjoy this activity, and this helped me understand what my child's learning in school. And then they can share optional comments with the teacher or questions. And you could convert this into a Google form, of course, to make it able to be shared electronically. And it is available in English and Spanish. We have links for those. So I'd love to hear from you how you might use this resource, whether you would share it with any of the teachers that you work with, how you might modify it to make it better fit your context. And would it help you better meet the needs of the children in your school? There was a really important comment about sometimes families do share with us and we don't know what to do with that information that they're sharing, or we don't know how to interpret it. And to that, I would just say, it's really important that the data gathering doesn't stop with the survey, right? There have to be conversations, because a lot of this can't be unpacked fully or sufficiently in, an annual panorama survey, even though those are very valuable tools and can help to identify trends and growth over time. Truly, we need to be able to have opportunities to connect directly with families in focus groups, as was suggested there, and other, discussion-based situations. Many of those teachers I've worked with have turned this into a Google form. I think one thing that is important to note is that technology is amazing. It's a wonderful way to share information broadly and quickly. It's also sometimes a barrier for families. There are still, we know that most families have cell phones, smartphones, and are able to access things on there, but sometimes they don't know how to install the app, or, they missed the email that told them how to set up the account. And so ensuring that we're reaching out via multiple modalities is always a good idea. All right, 4th and final domain is student agency. This one is my favorite because, I think families, educators, we all really have this shared desire to help students become independent learners, help them pursue their interests, understand their brains and how they learn, to know how to get help, when to get help, how to move their thinking forward when they're stuck. right? These are the skills of lifelong learners. They're the things that we as adults sometimes intuitively do and don't even recognize. And so being able to step back, take that metacognitive step back, recognize how these things work for us, and then think about how to help students, children acquire these skills is always our objective as educators. The indicators in this domain are goal setting with families, extending learning beyond the classroom, and helping families have learning conversations at home. So some tips that we bring to help team up with families in this area of helping students develop agency over their learning are, first of all, to involve students and families in goal setting processes. This allows us to all kind of know what we're working towards and get there together as a team. I think it's really important that we set both academic goals and social emotional goals simultaneously, right? So that students know that we care about more than just, their sight word recognition, but also, making good choices, demonstrating effort, working well with their peers. So having goals that kind of help them on both fronts are really critical. Another thing that we recommend is really just sharing tips with families, right? So they want, as everybody was saying in the chat, families want to support their children's learning. They really want to, but sometimes they just kind of default into the role of homework enforcer. Did you do your homework? What's due tomorrow? Did you do your homework, right? Because they don't know how else they can support. So let them know, what they can do. They can just ask other questions. What are you learning? What do you like about the book that you're reading? Show me an example of what you're working on in math. Can you show me how to do that? That's really neat, right? They don't have to have the answers. Also with the third tip is it's another favorite of mine, is to really incorporate opportunities for the child to take on the role of teacher or explainer. And we know that this is really beneficial. There's a ton of research around it, but also just our own experience as educators and as learners tells us intuitively that when we are explaining something to someone else, when we are the one, trying to, even just preparing to explain something to someone else, that we have a deeper understanding of it. I used to work for a principal who would say, whoever talks the most learns the most. So when she would walk into classrooms, she'd really want to see the students talking because that was the indicator of who was doing the learning. So it's fun. It takes the pressure off of the adults to have the answers. And it's something that can support learning as well. So the last resource that I'm linking to in the resource page is this handout that just has a few little conversation prompts for families. Really easy. You can print this off. You can send it out via messaging apps. Just little prompts that families can use to support their kids with homework or with any kind of learning. And what these do is they really take the burden off the family partner to be the expert. Right? If you follow the link that is in the resource page, this is actually available in 12 languages. So hopefully meeting most of the needs of your families. And I'll give you a moment to look at it. And then, I'd love to hear what other tips do you have for families? How else do you help families support their children's learning without having to just be in that homework enforcer role? I love Judy's comment in the chat that, any parent can ask good questions if they have some sentence stems, some prompts that they can use. Absolutely. I wanted to just return to this idea of home learning activities and what that could look like. These are examples of activities that were done by teachers that we work with, and they designed activities to have students. Oh, Betsy, your hand is raised before I dig into this. You're muted.
I was just going to say, this would be a great, when parents are coming in, orientation with parents. Wouldn't it be fun to be able to just practice some of the stuff? So we kind of give the stuff, but the practice piece could be so much fun. And you could even role play. So you could have, you could have parents be a parent and a parent be a child. It would be, you could really look at this as a fun activity and let parents feel really comfortable. I would love this. I would have loved this.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Betsy. Okay, so learning by teaching, right, these are real life examples. These are things that teachers we work with have done. They built out activities that it required the student to teach a family partner and then invited family feedback via the questions in the family survey that I shared earlier. So in these images, you see students learning about potential and kinetic energy. And so they're teaching someone at home through an experiment with a homemade ramp and a toy car, right? So what happens if the ramp is more steep, less steep? And then you can see examples of family feedback that the family partner submitted. So you can see the student describing what happens here as more height is added to the ramp, the car travels a greater distance. They're explaining the relationship that they're observing. And then the family partner is, responding with appreciation and the fact that they really enjoyed learning together, which I always like. Every time we see responses like this coming back in, it's generally just joyful. We see families expressing joy about this opportunity to do these activities together. Another example is of an ELA assignment where students are explaining like literal and metaphorical meanings of idioms to someone at home. They're drawing pictures. So, utilizing both kind of verbal and, visual sense making. And activities like these, they really support that triangle of learning relationships that we started with. This idea that, there's the two-way communication between the teachers and the families because the information is going home and the families are sending information back. That learning relationship between family partner and child is being strengthened as they're learning together, and the child is taking on some responsibility for this, really developing agency over the learning. And then they bring that back to the classroom. So now that you've seen our framework, you've seen just a couple of resources, I'd really love to come back to these guiding principles, right? And think about where are you seeing the connection between the framework for teachers, which you all have access to and are welcome to use, and the practices recommended in there, and the Connecticut guiding principles. Betsy asked if parents send videos or pictures. So we have an EdTech tool that does what I was showing there in terms of sending home learning activities and inviting families to send back feedback and videos of them and their child engaging in that activity. That tool is for kindergarten through second grade exclusively. But I think that if teachers, this is a strategy that teachers can adopt. They don't, on their own. And so depending on how you set it up, you can invite families to send pictures, you can invite families to send videos, or just, a message back to really learn from them about how the activity went and what that experience was like. I hope that you saw almost all of these evidenced today. Certainly building collaborative and trusting relationships that are focused on learning, that is at the heart of everything that we do and want to do and believe. Modeling high quality learning practices is something that you can definitely do through sending home learning activities. Sharing information frequently with their families. Obviously, there were some we talked about that, and soliciting information back from them, a few tools for doing that as well. And so I'm going to hand it back to Jill just to wrap us up, and then we'll hand back to Judy to wrap further. So Jill, it's you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate being with you today. And thank you, Emily, for guiding us through some really great concrete practices that our schools can use in engaging families and really connecting and building those relationships and allyships. If you're interested in learning more about PowerMyLearning, I'd love to connect with you. I'm on LinkedIn, so look me up. I'd love to stay in touch. We do webinars similar to this on a variety of topics that are related to school and district leaders, as well as teachers and families. And so if you're interested, just go on, just find me on LinkedIn or on our social media channels. We would love to connect with you. We are just really thankful for our time today. And thank you for all the work that you are doing in this space. We believe that this is life-changing work. And we thank you for the work that you're doing for the children of Connecticut.
It's really amazing, isn't it, when you think how powerful engaging families is in reinforcing children's learning and motivating their learning, helping them feel more comfortable and confident, knowing their parents and teachers are talking and knowing and respecting each other. And yet we really don't do this. And that's why NAFSCI is developing its core competencies in this area and has a consortium of several colleges and universities that are working on using these and implementing them into their curriculum so we can continue to build the field in this way. But meanwhile, you guys at PowerMyLearning have forged ahead and developing these tools and linking them up to other work that's already happening, like you're building in Beyond the Bake Sale, you're working with Joyce Epstein, and so on. And this all just helps pull everybody together into a more powerful, well-connected network of people who are working with the same kind of high goals and vision and ambition to make our practices in schools so much more equity-driven. And as Karen put it in a recent wonderful paper for Carnegie, it's liberating for both parents and teachers to be able to just work together, talk together, get to know each other as human beings, realize each has valuable knowledge and can be who they are and be respected for who they are. That has powerful messages for children as they see this happening with their school reflecting their culture. Such an important point you made about including students' cultural background in the curriculum so that students' prior knowledge is activated and validated in ways that build their motivation and confidence that they can carry back to their families in, what we call a virtuous circle. I'm going to shut up now and let somebody else talk.
So as part of the grant, the School Family Community Partnerships, we also are we're working with PowerMyLearning as well. So if you think that your school, right, would benefit from some of the work that's happening on behalf of PowerMyLearning, again, as Ann pointed out, it really connects with the work that we're doing. Please let me know. Okay, so you can email me and let me know as well that you're interested in even more information or maybe some coaching in your school. Okay, so that's a resource for folks. I do want to thank everyone. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Emily, for being here. Thank you, Ann Henderson, for loving Connecticut and being with us. We appreciate. We really have some pretty heavy hitters today. So I just want to thank everyone. And Judy, I'm going to toss it over to you for a sec. You have 3 whole minutes, Judy.
Oh boy. Yeah, I want to thank all of you for being here. The stars really aligned on this session and the work that PowerMyLearning is doing, which is, they didn't tout their incredible research base and effectiveness on the work they've been doing, but they've evaluated their work and they have a lot of evidence that this works. And Ann Henderson was here, friend of Connecticut, and international guru, who also is a friend of Connecticut and has supported us. So I'm thrilled and humbled that Connecticut's framework and the direction we're going is really in line with the best thinking in the field. So we're very fortunate to have had PowerMyLearning here, Emily and Jill, and of course, Ann Henderson. I think we're in good hands, and we look forward to digging deeper with you and sharing more. And through that evaluation, you'll let us know where it is you'd like us to take Friday Cafe. This is your network. We convene it, but we really look to you for direction. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you.